am without the invaluable lessons I learned from being a long-time camp participant. It is my hope that our legacy will continue far beyond my time here, and I am certain that there are young students here with us today who will be the faces of camp's future. As we head into our 11th year in passionate service to the Filipino student, we are infinitely grateful for your continued support and the support of our members, sponsors, and participants. The journey to studying abroad is certainly a daunting one, and the pressure on high school students can sometimes feel like too much to bear. After and the greater camp team are coming back to light the way. You will hear from many brilliant speakers who are working hand in hand with camp to inspire the next generation, and soon you will take their place. I, in my halcyon days, was once inspired by them too. That is why they are here today. Each of our speakers, in one way or another, has conquered a journey that many of you dream of one day taking. It is my hope that if camp is beneficial to you in any way, you will come back to continue our legacy of making the study abroad dreams of Filipinos all over the nation, regardless of their background, a reality. A camp, by definition, is a home away from home. As our campers, you will be the ones to set up your tents, map the surroundings, and forge your path forward. But let it be known that your fellow campers are here for you. Your family, friends, and camp are here to kindle the flames, but it is you who will light the fire. And whether you plan to set up camp, then pack up in 4 years' time to return home, or decide to make a permanent fixture out of your campsite, camp is here in full support of your dream. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I'm so excited for all of you to learn more about the study abroad process and what camp has to offer. So now that I've delivered my opening address, we will be hearing from Joan Ongchoco regarding our keynote address. Joan is currently a postdoctoral researcher at Humboldt University in Berlin. She obtained her PhD from Yale University in 2022, where she primarily worked with Brian Scholl. She is the recipient of the 2021 William James Prize, awarded by the Society of Philosophy and Psychology. Prior to Yale, she took up philosophy, politics, and economics as part of the inaugural class of Yale NUS College. After Berlin, she will be starting her own lab at the University of British Columbia. Everyone, let's please give a virtual round of applause for Joan Daniel Ongchoco.
Hi, everyone. Let me just enable. Oh, I think screen sharing has to be enabled for me to present my slides. So let's just wait for people to do that. Perfect. All right, just clear things here. I'm Joan. I graduated from Yale NUS College in Singapore back in 2017. And most recently, I obtained my PhD, as Maya mentioned, at Yale University. And so by trade, I'm a professor of psychology. I'm a scientist, and I'm very interested in the study of how the mind works. Why is it that we think that we do, act the way that we do, and so on. And so that's why I thought that it might be only fitting that I begin this keynote with one of, I think, the most fascinating biases or illusions in the literature or in our field, one that very few people, unfortunately, know of. And so I thought that I might share that with you today. And it's this bias that's called the end of history illusion. And in this particular study, what researchers did was they had people, they collected answers from a whole range of people, thousands of people actually across different races and genders and ages. And they asked all of these people a single question. And that question was simply, how different are you, or would you say you are, from who you were 5 years ago? And I want us to really now just stop for a moment and to think about this for ourselves. How different are you from 5 years ago? And if I'm understanding correctly, for a lot of you, you'll be junior or senior high school students. And so, you know, who you were 5 years ago would have been when you were 11 or 12 or so on. And if it's anything like how I was when I was 12 years old versus when I was 18 years old, there was a huge leap. And I was incredibly different from one point to another. If I think back to how I am today too, from before graduate school, before I got my PhD, I also am incredibly different. And so if you're sharing that same kind of intuition that, yes, like I have changed a lot from who I was 5 years ago, you join majority of the respondents in that particular study who said a lot. There was definitely a lot of change. Okay, so, but here's the twist. So this is the study so far. But then what people did was that what the researchers did was they tweaked this question just a little bit by changing one part of this question. So now, instead of having people look backwards, they then asked people to look forwards, simply changing the question to, how different do you think you will be 5 years from now? And again, I want you to just take a moment, think about what your answer is. For me, at least, I have this intuition where when I think to who I could be 5 years from now, I have the sense where it's like, I would hope that some of me will still be very similar to who I am today. I would hope that I still have the same preferences for sunsets and really, really good food, or that I will carry forward the same values that I have today to the values that I'll have 5 years from now. And so there's the sense that, or what was really interesting was that for a lot of the people they then asked this question to, many people, whether it was they were being asked about their personality, their preferences, or their values, many people said, not much. I won't change that much. So then there was this interesting asymmetry, right? Because it seems looking backwards, we're so willing to say that we've changed a lot, but then looking forwards, it seems like we're very hesitant to say how much we will change. These researchers then call this the end of history, because it seems like when we look forwards, it's like, okay, that's the end. I'm not going to be any different from who I am today. This is who I am. That's how I'm going to be moving forwards. And this was very puzzling to a lot of the scientists back then, because they were like, what's going on? What could be explaining this difference between when we look back to the past versus when we look to the future? And these scientists explained this phenomenon as a function of a kind of resistance to change, or this idea that in the face of all the uncertainty, all the fear, all the instability in the world around you, the way that we cope with this is by trying to hold on to a stable sense of self, where it's like, we will be exactly who we are, even if the rest of the world will change. Why am I talking, or why am I beginning with this particular illusion at all? Partly, I think it's because when it comes to the question of staying home in the Philippines versus going abroad and studying abroad, I think part of it, part of what has to come with studying abroad is a real challenge towards this end of history. Because I think intrinsically, inherently, to just studying abroad, going abroad, will be a lot of change, an incredible amount of change. And so for a lot of you here who are even considering going abroad in the first place, I think especially in the face of that resistance towards change, that takes a lot of courage. And so I commend you for being here and for even being curious about what it could be like in the first place to do something different. When I was in high school back in the Philippines, my graduating class was around, I think, 250 to 300 students, and only 5 of us ended up going abroad. Increasingly today, more people are, but still not a huge number. And so a lot of your other friends will probably head out to different universities in the Philippines. And so the idea or the possibility of going abroad for further education, I think, it can be scary, but it's incredibly courageous that you're even considering it in the first place. And so welcome to this conference. And yeah, there's a lot. I've seen the schedule. There's definitely a lot in store. What am I going to be talking about today? I thought that I would cover 3 different questions that you might have, or if you don't have them yet, it's probably important that you start thinking about them, because I think they're very important for even navigating any of these, this entire process of applying to schools abroad. And so first, I'll talk about why. I want to begin with that because I think it's very important to get that clear right off the bat. Why is it that you might want to go abroad in the first place? I'll talk about a whole host of reasons, and I'll talk about why some reasons are better than others. And that's okay if you have all of them, but it's at least important to be aware of why you might want to study abroad in the first place. Then second, I'll talk about what it's like. And this answer will be incredibly different across all of the different speakers that you'll hear from today. But I thought I might give a little bit of my own perspective of what it was like for me, tell you a little bit of my story and what it's been like in the past 10 years at this point, which is pretty crazy. Just to give you a sense of what you might get from studying abroad. And then finally, if you're still on board and if you're still ready to go about this entire process, I'll talk a little bit of how you might even begin. And I'll give a little bit of a teaser to what the rest of the conference will be like. And in particular, I think I come from this from an angle of having been in the admissions process and having seen a lot of applications. And so as a result, knowing a little bit of what you should be doing and what a lot of people do and what you then shouldn't do, and instead what you should try to do for your application moving forward. Okay, so that's the roadmap for today. And then we'll take questions if people have questions later on, and so on. All right, let's begin with the question of why. And when I was trying to think about this question, obviously I have a lot of thoughts about why you might want to go abroad, but then I was trying to think, well, how was it for me back when I was 18 and trying to figure out where to go to college in the first place? And back then, I think there was a whole host of reasons floating in my head as I was trying to make sense of what to do, where to go. I think there was definitely a part of the influence or, thinking about what my parents want for me. There was a lot of thought about, where would it be prestigious to go? That idea that studying abroad was better somehow than staying in the Philippines. And so that was another reason that was floating in my head at that time. There was some part of it that was peer pressure. I wanted to be where my friends were. And so and where a lot of my other seniors were. And so I think that was definitely also in play. So all of these reasons were in my head back then. And I really I didn't know. I don't think I had a clear why for myself, independent of these different reasons. And I'm going to now just preface this particular session by saying, or this particular section of my talk by saying, I think as a result of all of these different reasons that I couldn't quite figure out, I ended up being a first-year college student in 3 different universities. So can you imagine that? Like just going, like the first one just didn't work out. And so I kept on going until I found the final one. And so I think I have a particular insight into what it could be like going to all of these different places. Certainly back then, it was an incredibly confusing time. But looking backwards now, I think, I learned so much from it. But to give you a sense of that story, what happened was when I was in my senior year of high school, studying abroad was not even an option in my head. And so for a lot of you here who are, already preparing for this, if you're in junior or senior high, that's amazing. Good job. Because certainly that wasn't in my thoughts at all when I was where you were. And so I was interested in just applying to colleges abroad within the Philippines. So I applied to the typical Ateneo, La Salle, the University of the Philippines. In the end, I chose to go to the University of the Philippines, partly because that was where all of my other friends went. And that was sort of the path that a lot of people were taking. I was slotted there to major in business administration and accounting. So also a little classic, an expectation that my family had for me. And so that, and for a while that was great because a lot of my friends from high school ended up going here. And it was fun to just be around with them and to, keep being with them, but in this whole new environment, and experiencing this new chapter together. But then I remember this very vividly, where one morning, I was waking up, preparing for school and so on. And my dad just comes in and he's like, I think we really should consider the possibility of you maybe going abroad. And this was completely out of nowhere. And I was already all set to study in the Philippines. And so this came as a shock. And all of a sudden I was like, well, what does that even entail? I don't even know what that would include, what I would have to do, where I would start. And so in the next couple months, it was just a rush to study for the SATs and figure out the application process. But there was the sense that, okay, well, we'll try it out anyway. And so definitely my dad really poured in a lot of resources, a lot of effort into trying to help me through this entire process. And I ended up in the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, having done the whole UP thing. And then now here I was a couple months later in Hong Kong. Still a similar major. I was slotted there to be in global investment banking. And Hong Kong was a completely different experience from the University of the Philippines. First off, HKUST is a beautiful campus. So it actually overlooks Clearwater Bay. And so I would just spend mornings taking walks by the water. And then, of course, you have the rest of the city of Hong Kong later on with all the food and just the excitement of being there. And so it was an incredible experience, but then it was also the first time that I was leaving home, and that I was away from my family. And it was incredibly jarring. But there I was. And still, it didn't feel like it was quite right, or that I was quite settled in. And around that same time, we learned from the way that we were researching different universities around Asia that there was a new college that was going to be opening up in Singapore. And it was a collaboration between Yale University and the National University of Singapore. And it was going to be this new liberal arts college. And of course, it sounded incredibly prestigious. And we were like, this could be it. And so I, again, put together a separate application, and then I applied, and then I got in. And I was part of the 150 students who then started out that college where there was nothing. But partly, again, the motivations, I didn't know what I was doing. I was really just following the flow and figuring things out as things were going. But what I could never have anticipated was that Yale and US and my experience there would really have been just absolutely life-changing. And in particular, one of the biggest shifts was with me going from business administration and global investment banking to studying philosophy instead, philosophy, politics, and economics, and finding that was sort of where my passions were, where my curiosity was. But the other way that Yale and US, I think, opened up a lot of doors for me in a completely different sense beyond just intellectual doors, was that it allowed me to travel the world. So suddenly the world just seemed so much smaller. And in the span of the 4 years that I was at Yale and US, I remember in my sophomore year of college, one of those semesters, I was basically in a different country every weekend. And so I'd be traveling to Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, China, Japan, the United States, even Europe, and so on. And it's been an incredible worldwide experience since then. And so I bring this up because, all of a sudden my choices went from just being in Asia to all of a sudden thinking about places in the United States, places in North America, places in Europe. And suddenly the possibilities also expanded. And so currently I'm speaking to you from Germany, where I never would have dreamed of that, like back when I was 18, like why would I go here? But it's been an absolutely beautiful experience. And I kind of wish I could stay longer, but I'm only here for 1 year. And so part of why I bring this up is because when you're considering options, I think it's very useful to, I don't think you should be applying just all over the place either, but I think it's useful to not close down different doors just because you're not as familiar or it's not as prestigious or, it might be too far away from your comfort zone and so on. Because having lived in all of these different continents, having learned from a lot of different people, met a lot of different people across all of these different continents, it's really, you can't go wrong. And part of it is just finding the right fit for you. Okay, but I want to address probably one elephant in the room, which is, when laying all of these places out there, one thing you might ask is, well, that just seems incredibly expensive and incredibly resource consuming. Like, how did you even manage to pay for all of those trips? And so I recognize that to some degree, it does. I talk about this now from a position of incredible privilege that I've been able to travel to all of these different places. But the one thing that I'll note, actually, and this is another thing that you should be looking out for when looking at colleges in the first place, because I didn't know this when I applied to Yale and US, which was you want to be looking for the places that has the resources so that it can be able to support you for all the things that you want to be able to do. And so actually, none of this travel came out of my pocket, my own pocket. Many of my passions instead was what financed a lot of this travel. And so when I was at Yale and US College, they paid for me to compete as part of the debate team. And then eventually, when I started to do competitive ballroom very seriously, that started to get sponsored by different associations in Singapore. And then, of course, now I'm paid to travel for my work, for research, where I get to give talks all over the world and so on. And so it's really cool that this is possible. And that's just putting it out there where if you think that one limiting possibility is resources, where it's like, oh, I would never be able to do what she did because I simply don't have that funding. It's just not true. There are places to look for that, and that's something to think about when you're applying to different places abroad. Okay, so going back to the question in this section then of why is it that you might want to study abroad? And I started with all of these different possible reasons, from parents to prestige to peer pressure and so on. But I think probably the better reason that I didn't know of, but I wish I knew of when I was 18, was the better reason for why you would want to study abroad is to know the stories of the world, to know the stories of the people all over the world, the different cultures, the different perspectives that you will encounter. And I think it was that, in the face of so much uncertainty, that has never failed to give me a source of provide me a sense of hope and a sense of meaning and purpose. And it's just breathtaking to witness, honestly. And so that, I think, is one very, very good reason for why you should even consider it in the first place. Okay, so that's the first bit of why you might go. And I hope you really seriously consider this, because it's really an unbelievable experience to be able to do that. Okay, but what was it like? So I've talked a little bit of the story or the path that I went through, and the different reasons for why I went through that path in the first place. But I want to get a little bit more into the detail of what that was actually like for me, leaving home. And I think I'll preface this section by saying that it's just got to be different for everyone. And so I don't want to speak for everybody here. And so I'll talk about some things that were very specific to me, but maybe some of it will also resonate with a lot of people. But it's going to depend so much on where you end up going, whether it's Asia or the United States, whether you have family where you end up going, and so on. And so I would just keep that in mind. But for me, one of the most salient things about studying abroad was the impossible pain of being away from family. I think that was really the biggest thing. This is a picture of my sister's 18th birthday. I was already in graduate school then, so I couldn't really leave, take a long leave from work. And so I flew in, my brother and I flew in from the United States, and we were there for only probably 3-4 days, just to be there for her birthday. And it was one of the rare moments where we were all complete for this particular celebration. And so across the 10 years at this point that I've been away from home, it's been an impossible, like, it's really just been a lot of missed birthdays, a lot of different a lot of missed milestones across the lives of the people I love. And that has been just really difficult. And this is something that I still grapple with in different ways, even until today. And I think that many of my friends who have chosen to study abroad from the Philippines still also grapple with, because it's really hard. Because here I was, and I was, discovering all of the stories of all of these different places and people that I was encountering. But I was missing out so much in the stories of the people that I loved the most back home. It's a lot better now, a lot easier with technology, with Zoom and FaceTime and whatever, but it's just not the same as being there and being around and being able to just hang out on the weekend and so on. So that's definitely one con of going abroad, and one possible reason why you might second guess in the first place. But here's what I'll give as a counterpart to that, which is, I think as a result of being so removed from the lives of those people that I loved, and at that point, I was just incredibly confused. And there was a moment when I was like, what am I even doing? I don't know what I'm doing abroad. I should just be back home. And I remember asking a professor once also, because I was then deciding what I should even major in. And it felt like a huge existential crisis. And he gave me a reply that I thought was very strange, but then it really resonated with me, which is, he's like, Joan, just forget all of the noise and just think about, what is it that right now captures your imagination? Doesn't have to be fancy, just think about the things that really that you're often thinking about, that's often on your mind, and whatever that is, pursue that and focus on that. And I think that's how I discovered philosophy. And so I found that it was these texts, reading these texts, that gave me a lot of comfort, and that were really great distractions from being away from home. And what came with this experience of sort of reading all of these texts and so on was, I was eventually, right, that's what led me to figure out that I want to study psychology in the first place. And that's how I ended up at Yale. And so it's just starting with that very basic question, and then from there, discovering all of the things that I was interested in. So that was definitely one way that I was rediscovering a new passion or a new love for philosophy and psychology, and thinking about what is it to be us, to be humans in the first place. But this also came with so many other just amazing conversations with friends until 3 a.m., 4 a.m. from all over the world. And so these are just some of those faces that I've encountered over the years. But it wasn't just all intellectual conversation. I think there were a lot of times when I celebrated birthdays away from home, and found that my friends, or the friends that I've made, have sort of managed to figure out how to make it a little bit more like home. And so it's been incredibly special to be able to have been able to spend all of the past years with people that I've grown to love in this new kind of way. And so I think, so there was knowing the stories of the world, and then knowing this new way of loving and being loved and so on, and being just surrounded by that. And to just drive this home a little bit. So here's another thing that I miss the most about the Philippines, which is Christmas. I love it a lot, and it's a shame that many other places in the world don't celebrate it the way that we do. But I remember one time in college when I was just feeling really sad that I was away from home because I was missing Christmas. And I articulated this to a really good friend of mine back then. And we were by a Christmas tree. And I was like, wow, like this is making me miss home a lot. And he was like, well, Joan, like, let me just steal one of the Christmas balls from this Christmas tree, and then we'll take it back to your dorm room so that you can have a feeling of Christmas in your dorm room. And he was so stubborn, and he was so ready to steal these Christmas balls from the Christmas tree. And I was like, no, like, don't do that. I don't want to get kicked out of the country. Like, what are you doing? And so this was a constant back and forth between the two of us. Every time we visited this particular Christmas tree. And right before we were about to leave for Christmas break, and he was going to head off to the United States, we were feeling really sad about it. He asked me to send him off in the airport. And so I was like, okay, fine, like I'll do the trek. And so I sent him off in the airport. And when I came back to my dorm room, my whole room was filled with Christmas decor, the same Christmas balls from the Christmas tree. And in the room was a note saying, I stole these Christmas balls for you, but Joan, what is done in love is beyond good and evil. And this was a quote from one of my favorite philosophers back then. And it was absolutely magical. Like, I was right there. I had just sent him off, so he was already in the flight. But just the warmth and the magic of being in that moment and realizing just how much somebody took the time to care and to make this a Christmas that I would remember was really special. And so going abroad is really hard. But then when it comes to the question of what it was like, definitely because of the people, because of the conversations that you will have, it can be absolutely magical. Okay. All right. So hopefully at this point, you're getting more and more excited about this idea of studying abroad, because I think it can be a really life-changing experience. And so now I want to touch, in the last 10 minutes that I have here, a little bit of how would you go about this process? Like, where do you even begin? And I know that this camp conference is all about that, and part of it is supposed to help guide you throughout this entire process. But I thought I might give you sort of my take. And the one question that many people ask me as I mentor and help a lot of students put together their applications is, what's the formula? Is there a formula? I talk to a lot of teachers and parents about this too, and they all want to just be able to help their kids. And so just give me the checklist of things that I have to do so that I can support my child in the best way possible. And the typical things, if you just Google this online, and the typical things you'll hear from other people is, well, you get good scores, you win a lot of awards, you have a lot of extracurricular activities and so on. But I want to take a step back from this, and I want to sort of challenge this question a little bit and say, this is absolutely the wrong way to go. If you're thinking about it this way, stop. And I want to simplify this a little bit for you guys. And I think the single thing that you should just be thinking about from this point onwards and throughout this conference, but also throughout the application process, is how can I stand out? And I think, okay, it sounds incredibly vague and ambiguous, like what do I even mean? And so I thought I might give a couple examples to support this. But in my work, when I was doing admissions and reading all of these different applications, there was a typical thing that a lot of students tend to do, and even with the students that I mentor, which is to start out by just laying it all out there, right? So you might say, okay, like I'm a really passionate high school student. I play some sort of a competitive sport, or maybe I do competitive debate. I love the sciences, or I love writing, or whatever it is that you love. I'm service oriented, I'm class president, and so on. And so it's all about like putting it all out there, putting your entire resume, your entire CV out there. I think part of the problem with this, if you just take a step back and you think about the perspective of an admissions officer, and at that point, if you're applying to a university, they're getting like thousands of applications. And if you think how many of those applications will probably say, I am a passionate high school student, or will come from somebody who's been a class president, who's played a sport, and so on. I will bet you that probably all of those applications will have something along these lines. And so saying these things just doesn't help you stand out at all. In fact, it just makes your filling up this formula of what it's like to be a good student just doesn't help you, because you end up becoming like the rest of the other applicants. And when I was looking through applications when I was working in admissions, I'm having my coffee at 8 a.m. in the morning, reading the applications, and you better try to make me remember you at that point, because I'm tired and I'm doing all sorts of other things. And so the challenge has to be, how do I become memorable? And the way to do that is to stand out. And so I thought that I might go through just some examples a little bit, to give you a sense of what I actually mean. So let's take this first one of just a passionate high school student. A really good heuristic is to ask yourself, how many other people will say this? And if it's all other people, everybody else will say that I'm a passionate high school student, probably that's the wrong way to go. So here's a different thing that you can say, which is, let's say I'm the child of 5 other siblings, right? Because immediately you go from a pool of so many other students who are saying that they're passionate and talented and so on, to all of a sudden a smaller group of people. Because how many people do you know who is the child of 5 other siblings or kids, right? And so that ultimately makes you memorable, because it gets the admissions officer to ask, like, tell me what that was like. That's really interesting. Or you might take a different angle. You might talk about your high school and what made your high school special, right? So at the back of my high school, the chickens and cows roam around. Like, how many other high school students will be able to say that? Or you might flip this around its head and you say, well, my parents often tell me I have no talents, but here's my story and here's how I've tried to challenge that. Admissions officers are looking for want to hear your thoughts, want to hear your spine. Who is it that you are? What kind of person are you? And so I think these are the kinds of statements that kind of get the thought process going of, I want to learn more about this particular person. playing a sport, right? It's not enough to say that I've done this one thing. I think you want to be, because a lot of other people will have done those things. You can bet there will be somebody else who will have played a particular sport that you did or competed in some sort of competition. So something that can immediately help you stand out is just being excellent at what you do, right? So to the point that you're part of the national team, or you can sort of challenge people's conception of what a sport is in the first place and talk about something that they would never even have considered to be a sport to begin with. And so hopefully you're getting a better sense of this. It's the same thing, right? Like for any passion that you talk about, you always want to try to challenge people's intuitions and say, here's how I am different. And so for science, if you love the science, you might say in the Philippines, when people say science, people think medicine or becoming a doctor. In contrast, when you say science, I think of the stars. And this is what I want to study. How many other students will be able to say that, right? For me, I know of only one other student, one other friend who would be able to say this. And they were one of my college friends, and they're now in Harvard completing their PhD studying the stars. And I think that's what you want to be thinking of when you're going through this entire process. I know it can be a little daunting because I'm giving you all of these different examples of things that you need to become memorable and to stand out. And it might seem impossible at the start, but I think what you have to remember is just that by definition, you are a different person. And it's just, and also by statistical probability, probably nobody has had the same set of experiences, the same set of memories or passions that you have. And so part of it is just turning inwards and noticing for yourself, what is it that you really care about? And what is it that makes you different from everybody else around you? I think that's the kind of question that a lot of your mentors here at camp, that's what they're supposed to do, which is to help you try to find that unique angle so that you can put together a package that, you know, somebody on the other end who's reading about it will really want to know about you. And so, so that's, I think, why this conference can be incredibly helpful, and I would really make the most out of the different talks and speakers that you'll be hearing from throughout the next 2 weeks, I believe, or so. Okay, so I started out this question with home versus abroad. I think that has to be the question that you're asking because it is a big trade-off and it is a difficult decision. But I hope that through the different things that I've mentioned today, that somehow you're getting more excited about the possibility of going abroad and studying abroad and discovering more about the story of the world in its entirety, how beautiful it can be, discovering more about love and what it means to be loved, and then in the process discovering yourself and more about yourself. And I think all of these are incredibly related and they hang together, they have to, but I think these are all important things that you should be thinking about as you're going through this entire application process. But I think these are also all the different ways that you can challenge your end of history, right? Where it's like you don't have to be the same person that you are today, but rather there's just so much more that lies ahead of you, and that can be incredibly exciting, all the changes that will come to. And so thank you for being here. I'm incredibly excited. Welcome to the conference. And if you have any questions at all, be it what you want to major in, where you want to go, whether it's Europe, Asia, or the United States, I have done them all. I have done a lot of it at least. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'd love to talk to you about about what your thoughts are and where your doubts are and so on. So, all right. Thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to the rest of the camp team now.
Thank you so much, Joan, for your amazing talk. I agree that we really shouldn't close off any unexpected doors or opportunities because we never truly know what's in store for us. So thank you for allowing us a glimpse at your study abroad journey, both the good experiences as well as the more difficult ones. I'm sure a lot of the attendees found themselves inspired by your story. On behalf of CAMP's 2023 facilitation team, I would like to extend our sincerest gratitude and appreciation to you for sharing with us your valuable insights today. We are deeply grateful for your time, effort, and commitment in preparing and delivering such an impactful talk. Let's once again give a virtual round of applause for Joan.
Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Hachi Joan.
So nice to see you. Yeah.
You too. Okay,
Yeah.
so now that the session has officially ended, you may now collect your badges. A link will be sent to the chat box, and you can go ahead and open it to get the session's badge. Now that the keynote is over, I really hope that all of you have energy for the next talks we have today. Keep your eyes peeled for a lot more interesting workshops and talks, another including me. So yeah, thanks all of you. I'll see you in a bit.
See you guys. Bye.